I attended a smaller seminary, which allowed us to have good interaction with our professors. And one of the things they would do is they would take students, and if they were married, their wives, and they'd invite 4 or 5 couples to go to their home, and they'd have a dinner and just talk, sometimes play some games, but just kind of hang out with one another during that time. And there was one in which there was a professor who invited 4 or 5 couples up, and they were up there, and as dinner was being cooked, all of a sudden, there was a fight between the professor and his wife. Now, this wasn't one of those little honey fights. This was a fight. I mean, it got pretty strong. To one degree, finally, one of the students got up with his wife, said, "Honey, we're going to go." And he looked at him and said, "You sit in that chair right now." And so he sat down. And for the next 10 minutes, him and his wife went back and forth, but something amazing happened. But by the time the 10 minutes or so was over, they had apologized. They had given a hug. He said, but what was amazing, they had truly reset. This wasn't one of those, we're dealing with it now, but you wait till the kids leave. It wasn't. It was like it. And they said the next week while we were at seminary, the whole talk was about that argument with the professor and his wife. Because most of the students said, listen, I've never seen an effective fight. As a matter of fact, when my parents fought, they kind of left the room. We didn't see it. Or when they fought, we left the room because we didn't want to see it. They said, we didn't see a good fight. But as a matter of fact, no one ever sat down and explained to us how to fight. As we're doing game night, I want to talk about the game Sorry. If you guys have played that game before. And if you look, I just love the title. The classic game of sweet revenge, right? If you know the game, you bring your pieces out of home on the board and you roll and you move your pieces. But what happens is if you roll and your piece lands on someone else's piece, they have to go all the way back to the beginning. So what happens if you're there and you want to get around as quickly as possible, and a 6 is a big number, you want to roll it, but if your opponent is sitting there 2 spaces up, are you pulling for a 6 or a 2? You want a 2. Because then you bump them off and they have to go to the beginning. And you look at them in a loving way, you go, sorry. I mean, this is great, right? And unfortunately, when it comes to conflict, that's how a lot of us play. We aren't trying to solve the conflict, we're trying to defeat the enemy. And listen, though what we're talking about is very applicable in marriage, and most of the examples will be in marriage, listen, it works between parents and kids. It works with coworkers. It works with friends. So though I may be closed-circuiting a lot with couples, if you aren't married or you're single, you can use these principles too. And I would say learn them before you do get married. It'll be very helpful. I will say one more caveat before we start. It's so easy when there's a message like this to say, oh, I'm going to take some really good notes this morning for my spouse. It's really easy when I make a note, you kind of just circle it and you kind of say, yeah, did you see that one? I've been saying that, you know. And I'm just saying, can you listen for what God is going to say to you this morning? Let God speak to your spouse. Let God speak to your parent. Let God speak to your child. Let God speak to your friend. And you know what? Let God speak to you. If you do that, I think you can learn some biblical principles that you can put in practice that can transform, I mean that, transform your relationships that you have, especially when it comes to marriage. So we're going to look at 5 ways to win conflict and win it the right way. The first one is choose the right timing. Choose the right timing. See, you need to wait for the right moment. Now, we may wonder, now, Steve, you don't understand. There's never been a good moment in our marriage to have a conflict. All right? You may not know a perfect moment, but I think you probably have known bad moments when you shouldn't say something, and maybe you did. And let me just say, here's a rule. If there is an incident, if there is something that happens in your marriage, the closer you discuss it to the event, the more likely it's going to go south. And as I can say, in most cases, if something happens and you decide, oh, I'm going to tell you right now what you did wrong, it's most likely not going to go well. That if you can put a buffer, if you can wait and let some time pass between when the issue was and when you discuss the issue, it's more likely you're going to have a positive outcome. Look at Proverbs 15:28. It's on the screen. It's also in your notes. And it says this, the heart of the righteous weighs its answer, but the mouth of the evil, of the wicked, gushes evil. Now listen to that again. The heart of the righteous weighs the issue. Weighs it. See, you weigh something, you're taking your time. It's not like digital scales we had. When they weighed in that day, they had to put the item on the scale, then they had to put little blocks on it, and they had to keep adding blocks until finally it measured what it was. And you knew what the item weighed because you took all these blocks that you knew what they weighed. And it took time to weigh an issue. It's not like the digital scales we have today. And for most of us, when there's an issue, we don't weigh it, we jump right into it. And it's talking about if we're going to be wise, the righteous person, what? They weigh their answer. They think about, is this the right thing? Is this the right time? Should I say this? But the mouth of the wicked gush evil. See, we want to make sure we do that. See, no matter what the issue is, if it's big, if it's small, I'm just saying you don't want to say the first thing that pops into your head. Because if you say the first thing that pops into your head, I can almost promise you it's not going to be the right thing. Now, let me give you a hypothetical. It's hypothetical. It's never happened. It's not true. But let's say I'm brushing my teeth, and Lonnie walks by the bathroom, and I'm putting my toothpaste on my brush, and she looks and says, do you have to squeeze the tube in the middle? It's wasteful, and it's messy. Now, can I tell you, when Lonnie says that, as lovely as she is, I will look at her, and she has now morphed into my mama. And it's not going to be, I said, I've been brushing my teeth for a long time. I know how to squeeze toothpaste. And I'm not getting it everywhere. There's a little bit here. But I'm not getting it everywhere. And most likely, when she brings it up at the moment, I'm going to respond to that out of anger. I'm going to respond to that in trying to prove that I'm not wrong, that I'm right. So I'm just saying when it comes to an issue, if you can wait, it's more likely going to go better. Matter of fact, that'd be one of our applications. When possible, address an issue, not at the moment it arises, but later. Now, here's a very huge mark. It's not in your notes, but mark this down. Think of this. Remember, before you talk to your spouse, before you talk to someone else about the issue, first talk to God. See, that means you have to weigh it. So before you're saying what you're thinking, talk to God and see what He thinks. Talk to God and say, God, how do I say this? God, is this the right thing? Because here's one thing I know. You know what irritates a person the most is the weaknesses in their own life. It is. And so sometimes the issue wasn't that big, but if I slow down, it's just reflecting a weakness I have in my life. And so at that point, I may not need to talk to her. I may need to talk to God about me. I may not need to talk to my coworker. I may not need to talk to someone else. I need to kind of talk to me. Hey, parents, have you ever noticed the things that bug us the most in our kids are the weaknesses that they have that reflect our weaknesses? Isn't that true? Hey, I want to say, you want to make an angry person angry or really blow up, get angry at them. You take a person who can never be on time, make them wait and see how they respond. See, I'm just saying we want to go to God first because sometimes the issue may not even be our spouse. It may not be our coworker. It may not be our child. The issue may be us. Just the idea is we want to choose the right time. I think in 2 Samuel chapter 12, one of the hardest assignments ever gave, when God says to Nathan, David has sinned. He has committed adultery. He has plotted for murder. Go and confront him. And you know what? Nathan didn't say, I'm going. He talked to God. As a matter of fact, he tried to talk God out of it. No, God, he'll kill me. I don't want to do that. I can't. But what? No, he knew it had to be right timing. He knew. And because he was in step with God, because he went and said what God told him to say when he needed to say it, guess what? David repented. He was able to move past. God was able to continue using him. Guys, when it comes to winning in conflict, our first key is we need to choose the right timing. Second key, if we're going to do that, is, I'm sure, let me give you the key idea first. The key idea is this, it's in your notes. The moment a problem arises is often the worst time to address it. If emotions are high, the conversation is more likely to turn into defensiveness, blame shifting, instead of productive discussion. Choose the right time. Next point, start with gentleness, not harsh. Start with gentleness to avoid being harsh. You want to do that. So when it comes to dealing successfully with conflict, no one has put more research in that than a guy named Dr. John Gottman. His research-based principles have helped many couples learn to effectively deal with conflict. And as I've studied his literature, as I've went through his training, he's Jewish, but I see underneath what he teaches biblical principles. As a matter of fact, the reason I use them, the reason I think they work is they're biblical at their base. And one of the principles he gives that he says, unless this happens, you will never have productive conflict, is there's got to be a gentle startup. There has to be a gentle startup. See, in Scripture, look at Proverbs 15:1. It says this, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Again, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Haven't we seen that principle in practice before? That, you know, if all of a sudden we're sitting there and someone all of a sudden out of nowhere just, they say something, we kind of respond. And we've also probably seen it the other way, where someone came to us and they were like over the top. We're like, whoa, let's relax, let's calm down, let's do it. I get to ride with Huntsville police officers. I'm a volunteer chaplain. And one of the things they teach them is how to de-escalate verbally before it gets to anything else. How to talk, how to stay dispassionate, how not to let someone's anger affect you, how what they say when you walk up to the car, even if they're saying, you know, I pay your salary, or whatever it is, how to make sure to not let that stir you up. Because the principle is a gentle answer will turn away wrath. See, when it comes to relationships, marriages, I find out there's kind of two types of people. There are pursuers. Pursuers don't want to let something lay. If there's an issue, we have to deal with it. And then there's retreaters. They say when all else fails, we'll talk. But if we just leave it alone, it will probably get better on its own. Now, sometimes in marriage, you have a retreater married to a pursuer, and it's this constantly. One's going after the other one. Sometimes you have two pursuers, and man, it's going at it all the time. And sometimes you have two retreaters. They never talk. They never deal with issues. Everything looks good until the day everything blows up. See, in a healthy marriage, you have to have a way you deal with conflict. You have to have a way you deal with complaints. To me, it would kind of be like if you came to my house for dinner and you walked in and said, Steve, I don't know if you, but I smell that natural gas smell, the smell they put in there. Do you have a natural gas stove? And yeah. And we walk over to the stove and we scoot it back and we hear this psst. Would any of you say, hey, Steve, do you have a match so we can see maybe where the leak is? Now, I think most of you know we light a match and it's going to get ugly really fast, right? And see, if you never deal with conflict, you never deal with negativity, what happens is you're building up, and there will be a day when you deal with it. There will be a day the match is lit, and when it does, it is not going to be pretty. It's going to be far more destructive than it would have been had you dealt with it. When I do premarital counseling, one of the things I talk to the couples about, especially when they first get married, is to plan what I call a weekly fight. Now that sounds weird. Why would you want to plan a fight when you can have one for free? I mean, right? No, there's a reason behind it. You know, a matter of fact, I say practice this because the only way you get good at something is through practice. And if you do it consistently, then you have an opportunity to deal with it. And so what do? I kind of plan a time when it's 1 hour a week. And it kind of helps because then the pursuer goes, well, you know what? At least I can have a time. I can bring up the issues I want to bring up. And the retreater goes, hey, 167 hours a week of peace, I can handle 1 hour conflict. And so now, rather than dealing with it, they're writing things down. So when something comes up, they write down, here's the issue. Squeezes toothpaste in the center, whatever it is. They write it down. And they wait. Now, when they start the time, they have it pre-planned, set it for an hour. It can go shorter, but it can't go longer, so you know it's there. And then when you do something, one of the ways we call it a gentle startup is they have to be watching for positives, and they have to start the fight with saying 3 positive things, taking times with each other, that they've seen in their spouse that week. So it starts off, hey, honey, just so you know, when you emptied the dishwasher, and I was supposed to empty it, man, that was so nice. I appreciate you doing that. Or, you know, when you called me from work and you're on the way home and you said, hey, do you want me to stop and get anything from the store? That really helped because I was going to, but I didn't want to make you run late. So you're going back and forth. So guess what? You've just had some positive influence. You've now had a soft start. And so what happens then is now we engage in the issues. And what is that? That is where you bring up the issue one at a time. They bring up one, you bring up one. And you go to all the issues or talked about, I should say, or till time runs out. And so let's say in this situation, we've had this, me and my wife are having a weekly fight, and all of a sudden she says, honey, you know, the other day when I was coming by the bathroom, you were putting toothpaste on your toothbrush. And I noticed you're squeezing in the middle, which kind of caused some to get out on the counter. a little messy. And, I really want to keep our bathroom clean. I work hard at that. Would you mind rolling the toothpaste? Now, here's the amazing thing. You know how I'm going to respond to that 90% of the time? Probably 99% of the time. Baby, I'm so sorry. Yeah, I can do that. No problem. Why am I a different guy? Because now I don't feel like I got caught doing something wrong. Now there's been distance, and guess what? Now we can deal with the issue. Another great thing is that you may write things out during the week. Oh, yeah, I don't like this. And then you come back and look at it when you're about to start your fight, and you go, well, that's really silly. Why did that bug me? I shouldn't. Or that's not worth talking about. You also can prioritize it so you deal with your bigger issues first. So if you run out of time, you've dealt with your bigger issues. Now, I can say of all the things I've done with couples over the years, and I've counseled a lot of couples in premarital counseling, this is the one they've come back and said, you know what? Of everything we learned, this was the most helpful. Even though we only did it 3, 4, 6 months, we learned the principles here that we could take into any time a fight broke out. See, I want to say this. When you're in marriage, it's like you're carrying 2 buckets the whole time. One bucket is gasoline, one bucket is water. And when there is contention, you have a choice. Look at that spark. Do I pour the gas on it? Do I pour the water on it? Now, what is the right choice? The water. But yet sometimes it bugs us and we throw that bucket of gas on it, and then we wonder why our house is on fire. So you make a choice, and you have to say, is this the right time? Is this the right time? If it's not, don't make that choice. Here's the key idea. The tone of your words can de-escalate or a conflict. A gentle approach helps the other person feel heard, while a harsh approach puts them on the defensive. Just understand, you have the ability to de-escalate the conflict. You have the ability, not in what they do, but how you do. Why? Because it says a gentle answer. Even if they're harsh with you, a gentle answer turns away wrath. You have that ability. Next point. Speak to solve, not to attack. Speak to solve, not to attack. If right timing is the first and most important principle, right words is the second and just behind it in importance. What you say really matters. Even if it is the right time, even if you've had a gentle startup, if you say something cruel, if you say something mean, if you say something vindictive, it's going downhill. Look at Proverbs 12:18, the next verse, Proverbs 12:18. It says this, the words of the reckless pierce like swords, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. The words of the reckless. You get that? Sometimes we say reckless words. We say things that are off target, that are hateful. They derail the whole thing. And it's like a sword just going in. It's destructive. Opposed to that, the tongue of the wise, rather than cutting, the tongue of the wise, rather than tearing down, it brings healing. So we have to think, when we do discuss, are we slashing these words at our partner, or are we bringing healing in this situation? I can say when you're speaking, just a few little keys I can give you. One, when you're talking, try to avoid the words always and the words never. As soon as you use always or never, the person you're talking to will discount everything you're saying after that. If you say to them something like, you always blame me, you're never on time, you never remember to bring out the trash, they've just discounted everything you said. My wife said to me, you never take out the trash. Oh yeah, 3 weeks ago I took it out. Missed the last 2 weeks, but you're wrong. See, I've got to listen behind it. For me, I've got to listen. When she says that, she's just emoting. It seems like you always forget there. But she'd be so much better if she said, it seems like you were forgetting the trash a lot lately. Then I can own that. But as soon as she says never, as soon as she says always, my mind goes to the one exception, and I discount everything else that's been said. So stay away from the word always. Stay away from the word never. It just discounts your argument. Next, stay on one issue at a time. It's so easy when you get in an argument to go to another issue because something else comes in your mind. Or maybe you're losing this one, but I'll win this one. And you go over here. If you're going to deal with it, deal with one issue at a time. Don't move to another issue. Don't use it as a subtext. Like your spouse is late, don't pull out the folder. Time my spouse has been late. You were late here, late here. No, you're talking about the one incident. You're trying to deal with that. Also, when you're talking, try to be dispassionate. Try to stay calm. And one of the things is don't mimic your spouse. Now, when I have couples that come into my office, and quite a bit I do when they do marriage counseling, I see this happening all the time. That one will be telling me about an argument, and they go into this weird voice when they're talking about their spouse. And then you said, "You're such a loser. I can't believe I married you." I mean, you're like, is that how he talks? No. It's just when you mimic someone, it irritates them. You'll make someone mimic him. Or it's the husband. "You just think you can cry all the time. Once you cry, you win the argument." I mean, don't use motions. Just talk. You know what? If you say it, when you said I was a loser and you wished you hadn't married me, it deeply hurt me. So you say it that way. You don't say it. They may have said it with passion. You say it dispassionate. Because if you don't, the filters go up and they're never going to hear what you really said. Now make sure you are attacking the issue, not the person. The issue, not the person. What's the issue? Deal with it. If you feel like they disrespect you because they're never on time, deal with that issue. Don't deal with, and let me tell you the other areas you're done wrong. Deal with the issue. Don't attack their character. If they lost a job, you can say, I'm scared that you've lost a job and I'm not sure how we can provide. Don't say, I'm scared you've lost a job and you'll never be a good provider for our family. See the difference there? You want to stay on the issue. See, I think one of the reasons that a weekly fight works so well is it gives you a time when you can deal with issues. Because see, sometimes we think, I just don't need to say anything. And I think that's wrong too. If I'm doing something that's bugging my wife and she doesn't tell me, then I'm losing units every week and I could maybe make changes. As a matter of fact, Gottman, when he studies it, he says 40% of all the issues in your marriage, you can find a solution if you work through it. And he says 60% of the issues, those are ones like finances, those are ones like in-laws, kids, the one Pastor Mark is talking about next week. Those are issues you may always have to dance with, but deal with the issues you can deal with. Example, my dad, his job was at the arsenal. He got hired in the 50s when the Redstone Arsenal was exploding. He put in all those steam pipes. Then once those were put in, he became a plumber and he worked on there. And so they gave him coveralls that he would wear every day. And he'd have to get in the dirt. He'd have to crawl under the different buildings. So they got pretty dirty. And my dad got home at night. There was a hamper in the corner of the room where he would take off all of his dirty clothes, put in the hamper, but he'd take off his coveralls and he would throw it at the foot of the hamper. Now, my mom, she would come and she would be looking and she would go to get the things, and she had rheumatoid arthritis. She couldn't bend her knees well and stuff, and she'd be trying to get down to get his coveralls. And she would see me, "Steve, can you take the coveralls and put them in the hamper, please?" Or I'd see her sometimes with a stick trying to pick them up to put them in. See, my mom didn't want to say anything because she knew he got up early, he worked hard, and she thought, you know what, it bugs me, but I'm not going to say anything. That went on for over 10 years. To finally one day, it just hit her. And she responded not in a good tone to say to my dad, "Lawson, do you have to throw your coveralls down there? I can't bend down, my knees hurt, why can't you put your coveralls in the dirty clothes?" And Dad was very dispassionate, and he just said, "Well, if they're so nasty, I didn't want to put them with the other clothes that aren't that soiled." And she was like, "Lawson, I wash all the clothes. Put them there. Sometimes I separate them, sometimes I don't. I make that decision, but please put it in the hamper." You know what my dad did the next day? He put it in the hamper. You know what he did the next day? He put it in the hamper. And for the next 20 years, he worked at the arsenal. Guess what he did? He put it in the hamper. And she later laughed about it. She said, "For 10 years, I was mad. For 10 years, I was frustrated just because I didn't tell him, and he thought he was helping me by keeping it out of the hamper." I'm just saying, there's times you need to have that time together so you can deal with issues and solve it. And one of the things when you do that, you can notice as you're working through it, when you come in with a good attitude, you start positive. It's kind of like two boxers. If two boxers get in the ring and they put on the gloves and they start welling at each other, as long as they follow the rules, there's no purposeful low blows. No one's trying to bite an ear off, Mike Tyson. All right, none of that's happening. At the end of the fight, you know what most boxers are going to do almost every time? They're going to hug the other guy. Why? Because they know it was just business. They both made millions of dollars, and they're okay. And so I'm just saying, when you do this the right way and you go through it, afterwards you can actually reconnect. Afterwards you can actually reset because you've dealt with the issue and you've done it with the right words and you've done it at the right time. Look at the key idea. Conflict should be about solving problems, not attacking people. Criticism and contempt tear a relationship down, while kind, constructive words build it up. Man, your words are so important. We go back to the story of David and Nathan. Remember, Nathan did not want to confront David. But when he did decide to obey God and confront David, did he walk in and said, David, you have sinned? No, because he didn't want to die, okay? He's like, hey, David, how's it going? You having a good day? Yeah, hey, I got this story. There was this shepherd, and he only had one lamb, and this other guy had a lot of lambs, and he took that one shepherd, and, and David's like, that man's got to die. And then he goes, David, you're that guy. And God broke David's heart, and he repented. See, if we'll let God sometimes deal with our spouse rather than us trying to deal with it, if we'll let God deal with us and let God deal with them, and we find the right words at the right time, you might be surprised what God can do. See, as a Christian, what an advantage you have, because we have a third rail in our marriage. It is God. It is our relationship with the Holy Spirit. I love the fact that Lonnie is committed to Christ, and Lonnie wants to please God, and I can step back and leave room for God to work in her life. I love that I'm committed, and I can go and I can say, God, where have I succeeded as a husband? Where has I failed? Where I need to improve? And I can let God deal with me. And I think it makes a difference when we don't feel like we have to change them. We can leave room for God to change them. That's why Paul says in Romans chapter 2, speaking of our relationship with God, he said, it is his kindness that draws us to repentance. The fact that God gives us not what we deserve, but he gives us grace, gives us room to realize, confess, and change. And if your spouse feels condemned by you, if they feel like they're walking on eggshells, they're going to have a hard time changing. But if they feel like you're giving them grace and you're giving them room, guess what? They not only can have the ability, but they'll have the willingness to change. We want to make sure we have the right words and not attack. Next principle. Listen first and respond thoughtfully. Listen first, respond thoughtfully. Now, I want to be honest this morning. Of all 5 of the principles I am sharing this morning, this is the one I am the weakest in. Just am. I am a fast talker. I am a fast learner. I listen to books double speed. And my mind just moves 90 miles an hour. I would make an excuse and say I grew up with 3 older sisters, and if I didn't jump into the conversation, I wouldn't have ever spoken, but I won't go there, okay? I'm just saying this is something I have to deal with. It's a weakness I need to improve. But if you look at Proverbs 18:13, it says this, to answer before listening, that is folly and shame. Right there. It is folly and shame. And I don't think that we mean to do that. It's just that we kind of think we know where our spouse is going. We think they said this. If they only knew this, they would feel better. If they only knew this, they'd understand why this. And rather than letting them finish, we want to jump in. As soon as we hear this, we stop listening to them and we start forming our response in our head. And as soon as we start thinking through our response, we've stopped truly listening to them. We need to know that what our spouse is going to say is maybe not what we think. We are not mind readers. Hey, there is a verse in the Bible that I think if we could learn and apply, it would transform marriages. It would transform relationships. If we truly did this, you'd have people showing up to say, I want to talk to you. You'd have people who want to sit down and have lunch, have coffee, and it's James 1:19. It's in your notes. It's there. Dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Quick to listen. The Message says it this way: lead with your ears, follow with your tongue, let your anger straggle along in the rear. I love that. Lead with your ears. If we were quick to listen, that means when people come to us, before we want to jump in, or they're talking about going to Disney, we can't wait to jump in and tell them about our trip to Disney. Or they've run a 10K, so we can't wait to tell them about the marathon we ran. I mean, before we do that, we actually let them totally unpack what they're saying. We actually draw them out. We are quick to listen. We are slow to speak. As I become aware that I jump in on conversations with my wife, especially on the cell phone, because you have that little delay, and so when she's talking, and when I sense that she has finished talking, I will, in my head, silently say, 1001. 1002, 1003, 1004. And if she has said nothing, I will speak. But what I am shocked is how many times I get to about 1,002 in my head and she continues. She just had to breathe. Go figure. And she's taking a breath and now she's considering a conversation. Or maybe she thought for a moment, hey, I want to say, but it's amazing how many times I think, dang, I was about to say something. That was wrong. It was a comma. It wasn't a period. I didn't know. So I'm just saying, for me, it slows me down. I still don't do it well, but I can tell you I will figure it out, and it helps me to know, and it convicts me to know I need to be quick to listen. I need slow to spot. It's like almost, has your spouse ever said, well, do you want to say something? I don't mean, do you want to say something? But I mean just like, would you like to say something? Are they saying something in a way so they are ready? See, if we do that, people look for people they can talk to. One of the ways that helps is when you're talking to your spouse in their conversation, especially in an argument, is repeat what your spouse has just said to make sure you truly understood it. So what you're saying is, and you repeat it, and they may say, no, that's not what I'm saying. That's the first 10 words, but I said a lot more. Okay, well, great, let's try it again. When I was in seminary taking my counseling training, one of the classes we had, a whole class was called mirroring. And it was how to reflect back on your spouse so they knew that you understood them. And I thought, I was in that class, I go, this is the stupidest class. I mean, we had to, not only have to take a class, we had to do that lab then where we sat across from each other and we mirrored. Oh, what you're saying is this. And they taught us a little thing, just repeat the last things that they said at the end. Like, if they say something like, I can't believe the way they treated me. They thought I was worthless. And you can just say, they thought you were worthless? Yeah, and they keep talking. And they say something else, this is the worst I've ever felt. This is the worst you've ever felt. And if you want to try that, people just take off because they haven't finished and you let them get the emotions out. But I did it. I went back home and I thought, it's a stupid class. I'm going to have fun tonight. I'm going to practice mirroring just with my spouse. So she started talking and I would mirror her. I'd say the last word and she would say more. And I was like, well, she'd say more. She'd say more. And finally, the whole evening finished. We're getting ready to go to bed. And she looked at me and said, listen, I know you were taking a counseling class today. I don't know what you learned, but this was the most enjoyable conversations I've had with you since we've been dating. I realized mirroring wasn't stupid, but somebody else was. Okay, I'm just saying, it was me. I was realizing that so many times if we can just do that, if we can just listen and reflect, you'd be surprised. Sometimes the anger dissipates and you realize you may not even be the issue. And they may come around and say, yeah, I'm sorry I blew up. I'm sorry I'm so passionate. I'm sorry. And when you give them time and you don't cut them off, you might be surprised that sometimes it will work out itself without you having to say a word. Me and Lonnie, our devotion time, we were reading something in devotion, and she just made a comment. Sometimes we get truth and we respond to it, and sometimes we react to it. It's kind of like a drug. If you take a drug, you want to have a response, not a reaction. Like you're taking a drug for fever, you want a response. A response is what? Your fever goes down. A reaction, you get rashes all over your body, right? That's the bad thing. That's when you're responding. You're not reacting. I'm sorry, you're reacting, not responding. And so when we're talking to our mates, when we're talking to our friends, coworkers, are they responding or when we're listening, are we responding or reacting? And we need to step back and say, if I'm reacting, it's in me, it's not in them. I've got to look and say, how do I respond to what they said rather than react to what they said? Sometimes couples will come to me where, man, they just cannot keep from talking over each other. I mean, I'm there, and I come in. I always say I try to mentor and coach. Coach is where I help them learn how to come up with solutions. Mentors is where I give them tools and techniques they can use. But I don't want to be Judge Judy. Okay, I don't want to be, you're out of order. You do this. But I've done before where I use what's called a talking stick. It's just an item. It might be my sprinkler. I don't have a sprinkler. It might be my stapler. And I say, here. I don't keep a sprinkler in my office, but it's my sprinkler. I would say, I want you to hold this stapler. And as long as you're holding the stapler, you're the only one that can talk. And I tell the other one, you cannot say anything. When they're finished, they're going to hand you the stapler. And they'll start talking and talking. And the other person, you can tell they're listening and they're ready to say something. They're like, and I've even had them raise their hand. I've had them reach for the stapler. No, stop. And then what really gets them is when they finally finished and get ready to hand them the stapler, I said, whoa. Before you take the stapler, just repeat in essence what they just said. And sometimes they'll go, I don't know. I'm just remembering what I wanted to say. And to their great chagrin, I'll say, keep the stapler. Please tell him again. Now, I shouldn't say him again, but normally it is. But anyway, it's just saying it's what's true. But what they learn is they have to listen totally, and then they hand the stapler to the other person, and then they talk, and they handle it back. And what they realize over time is how much, and I've had them tell, hey, we went home and we grabbed the spatula. This is our talking stick. And I said, well, you can use the spatula, you just can't swing it, but it's okay if you want to do it. But the idea is we don't realize how many times we talk over people. We don't listen to people. And if we can just be quick to listen, slow to speak, I promise you, anger will stay way behind you. So key idea here, listening is just as important as speaking in a conflict. A defensive response escalates arguments, but thoughtful listening builds understanding. Thoughtful listening. Just making eye contact, just saying that, yeah, just, a little voice, yeah, you'd be amazed how just giving eye contact, just putting your head as a yes, it's active listening in what you do. Last point, control anger, don't let it control you. Control anger, don't let it control you. 2 scriptures, we'll read them here. First is Proverbs 29:11. Fools give full vent to rage, but the wise bring a calm in the end. And then listen to this other verse from Proverbs 15:18. A hot-tempered person stirs up conflict, but the one who is patient calms a quarrel. Don't you love that? If we have anger, it's going to lead wrong. See, anger is not a sin, but venting your anger in rage is. The idea of the scripture is this: a fool will escalate an issue, but a wise person will de-escalate an issue and bring calm. Remember, you're always carrying those 2 buckets. And when it starts flaming up with your spouse, you make a choice. You can do nothing, which is better than some wrong thing. You can pour the gas on it. Well, you know what? You aren't saying that. Or you could, or you can calm. You can pour water on it. You have a choice in what you do. See, the problem is once anger is released, once anger builds up, we start to flood. Now, what is flooding? Flooding is a psychological thing where you actually will get a release of adrenaline just from an argument. You'll do it. You might have hit it before where all of a sudden someone cuts out in front of you, and you're driving and you have to slam on your brakes not to hit them. You felt that flooding. You may hit your horn or you get mad. And if I could take your pulse right then, your pulse rate, your heart rate, your respiratory, it all went up. And so when you start getting into it with your spouse, you'd be shocked at how you go into flooding. And once you flood, you start releasing the adrenaline. You either fight, flight, or freeze. All 3 of those is going to be poor in trying to deal with the conflict. Now, I don't use these a lot, but I had this tool. I had them before COVID. Those little things you put on the finger, they pinch your finger, and they give you your pulse rate, and they give you your oxygen level. Well, see, I can set those like at 100 to 110. I can put an alarm on them. And when you're sitting on the couch talking, you shouldn't go above 110. But I can put it on couples, and they start talking, and all of a sudden they forget they're on, and they hear this beep, 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 beep. And so what's happening? Your alarm's going off. What? And then it goes off higher. But the other one goes off, and they don't realize they're flooding. As a matter of fact, counseling biofeedback is teaching people how to recognize when you're flooding so you can do the things to bring down your emotion, to bring down. And see, the problem is once you are flooding, you will say things that are very hurtful and that are destructive that you would never otherwise say. Things that you will regret, but you cannot take those things back. When you're flooding, you will say, I can't believe I married you. Everyone was right. You were a loser. The worst thing I did was marry. We should just get a divorce. We'd be happier without each other. We say these things that we really don't mean, but once you're flooding and you continue in that conflict, you will say things that are destructive, that are hurtful, that can't come back. In the weekly fight, and you can use this outside the weekly fight. Me and my wife don't do a weekly fight now, but we use this. It's called a timeout. And that is when you sense in yourself you're starting to flood, or you sense your partner's starting to flood, you're allowed to call a timeout. That's just very gently going, I need a timeout. Gently, not you need a timeout. You're flooding. No, it's just like, even if I think they're flooding, it's I need a timeout. And at that point, there's a pre-agreement that we will take a break for a minimum of 5 minutes. Get up, go get some water, walk around. And when you do this, guess what? If I put a pulse rate on you, your pulse will come down, your respiratory rate has come down. And there's been times where in our marriage, we have used a timeout, and after 5 minutes, we're fine. We don't even have to go back and talk about it. We just realized that we were flooding up. And if we do have to go back and talk about it, we're ready to deal with it. Now, in the weekly fight that only lasts 1 hour, you can call a timeout. Once the fourth timeout has been called, it's over. This is not a good night, and you'll come back at another time. But the principle is having a way that you can recognize, having a way that you can get away from the conversation so it doesn't become explosive, destructive, and do more harm than it would do otherwise. When you're feeling anger, what you've got to do is you've got to take action to cool off. You may cause the conflict, and again, commit to re-engage later to resolve the issue. Again, the idea is you're going to resolve the issue. Your timeout isn't to stop it, it's to come back, because if you don't deal with the issue, it's like building that gas up in the home. Eventually, it's going to blow up. So it's kind of like a pressure cooker. Now, a lot of you may have an Instapot or a pressure cooker. You know, when pressure cookers were first made, they didn't have the relief valves in them. And you had them on your stove, and they were times when people actually had them explode and cause severe damage because there was no relief valve and it got too high and it literally broke the integrity of the pot. And then other times when people would let it cool down some but not enough, and they would open it because it didn't have the locks, and all of a sudden it would spray out and people would go to the hospital with severe burns because they opened it when it was compressed. Well, now it's dummy-proofed. Now they have a lock on it so it won't let you open it when there's pressure, and it also has a relief valve. So rather, my mom, she had one, didn't have a relief valve. She would put it in the sink and she would spray cold water on it. And then when it got down low enough, she'd try it and she could tell there's no pressure and she would open it. I'm just saying, guys, when you're in a conflict and you feel the pressure is high, walk away from the pot, okay? I'm just saying, you don't want to get it off the heat. You want to put it under the sink. You don't want to open it. And for a lot of us, we do more damage than good. Why? Because we end up dealing with the issue when it's not right. We're flooded, and it's a time when anger is not going to be controlled. It will control us. So key idea, anger is not inherently sinful, but uncontrolled anger leads to sin. Healthy conflict strengthens relationships, but out of control anger leads to regret. See, your marriage is not healthy if you have no conflicts, because some people, they're just stuffing, and one day it's going to blow up, and it's going to be ugly. I've seen it. Your marriage isn't healthy because you're all the time conflicting. That can be destructive too. It can make a home that lacks any peace. And I would kind of say in a marriage, you're kind of like this, okay? And then a conflict comes in and there's some separation, and then separation goes out here, and sometimes you kind of turn your back and they turn their back. But eventually I say someone kind of bids for peace. Hey, how are you doing? And then we kind of come back together. And the healthier marriage isn't how often this happens. It's how quick you can go from here to reset. See, the professor I started the story with, they were here and they started having an argument and separating. And because they dealt with it, within 10 minutes, they were back here and they had totally reset and they had a good evening and things went well. Why? Because they dealt with it. And for a lot of you, maybe you've had things building up and you've never dealt with it because you're just like, hey, this is going to blow up. Maybe for some, you feel like you're always fine. I'm just saying, you want to learn a way to have healthy conflict. And if you'll put these principles into practice in your relationship, it will make a difference. And then if you're leaning on that third rail, that connection to God to empower you to be the person you're called to be, the person God wants you to be, if you're leaning on God changing your spouse as much or more than you'll try to change them, you might be shocked at what God could do in your relationship.